The room went silent the moment Bruce Lee lifted his eyes and locked them onto Chuck Norris. No music. No chatter. No movement. Just tension hanging thick in the air. Bruce Lee spoke calmly, almost casually, and said just 2 words. "Hit me." For a second, Chuck Norris thought it was a joke. Then he laughed. Not a polite laugh. A loud, confident laugh that echoed across the training hall. Everyone there knew Chuck Norris. National karate champion. Unmatched power. Relentless aggression. A man whose strikes were famous for ending fights in seconds. Fighters respected him. Challengers feared him. And here stood Bruce Lee, smaller, lighter, relaxed, inviting a hit like it was nothing. Some people smirked. Others whispered. A few shook their heads. They thought Bruce was testing his luck. Chuck rolled his shoulders and grinned. "You sure you want that?" he asked, half amused, half insulted. Bruce didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't raise his guard. He just stood there, balanced, calm, breathing steady, like a man waiting for a bus, not a punch from one of the deadliest fighters alive. That calm unsettled the room. Chuck stepped forward. He wasn't angry. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He simply believed this would be quick. A clean demonstration. A harmless lesson. The moment stretched longer than it should have. Bruce nodded once. A silent signal. Chuck moved. What happened next didn't look dramatic. No flying kicks. No loud impact. No crash to the floor. But within 3 seconds, the laughter vanished. Chuck Norris staggered back. His confident grin collapsed into confusion, then shock, then panic. He dropped to one knee. His hands clutched his chest. His mouth opened, but no air came in. The room froze. This wasn't pain. This wasn't injury. This wasn't acting. Chuck Norris, one of the toughest men in the world, was gasping for breath like a man drowning on dry land. People stood up. Someone whispered, "What just happened?" Another muttered, "Did Bruce even touch him?" And Bruce Lee. He stood exactly where he was. Breathing slow. Eyes calm. Face emotionless. Not a drop of sweat on his brow. In that moment, everyone realized something chilling. This wasn't a challenge. It was a lesson. And they were about to witness just how dangerous true mastery really is. This didn't happen on a movie set. There were no bright lights, no dramatic music, no crowd screaming from the sidelines. It was a private martial arts gathering in the late 1960s. An invitation-only room filled with men who didn't need introductions. Fighters who had tested themselves in real matches. Teachers who had broken bones, not boards. Legends in the making, long before the world would know their names. No cameras were allowed. No reporters. No ego performances. Only truth. Chuck Norris was already a force of nature at that time. A national karate champion. Thick muscles carved by discipline. Strikes known for their raw power. When Chuck hit, people stayed down. His confidence wasn't arrogance, it was earned. Every man in that room knew exactly what Chuck Norris could do. Bruce Lee, on the other hand, was different. He was respected, yes, but not fully understood. To many, he was the fast guy. The flashy one. The thinker. Smaller than most. Lean. Quiet. Some admired his philosophy. Some doubted his practicality. They believed Bruce was brilliant, but against real power, they weren't sure. Bruce didn't boast. He didn't talk about championships. He didn't compare himself to anyone. He simply observed. As the gathering progressed, fighters exchanged ideas, techniques, theories. Conversations turned into demonstrations. Light sparring. Controlled strikes. Mutual respect. That's when the attention slowly drifted toward Bruce and Chuck standing across from each other. Two different worlds. Two different approaches. Chuck crossed his arms, relaxed but alert, a faint smirk on his face. "You sure about this?" he asked, not mocking, just confident. Bruce smiled calmly, the way someone smiles when they already know the outcome. "Just hit me," he said. "As fast as you can." The room shifted. That sentence landed heavier than any punch. People leaned forward. Some exchanged nervous glances. Others expected Bruce to change his mind. But Bruce didn't adjust his stance. Didn't raise his guard. Didn't step back. He stood loose, balanced, breathing steady. That confidence without tension confused people. This wasn't bravado. This was certainty. Before we go any further, pause for a second. Backhand index pointing right, comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Thumbs up like this video if you truly respect real martial arts, not just flashy fights. Bell subscribe if you want more legendary, untold moments like this. Because what happened next wasn't just impressive. It was life-changing. Chuck studied Bruce carefully now. He realized Bruce wasn't challenging him. He was inviting him. Inviting him into something deeper than strength. Chuck took a small step forward. His expression turned serious. This was no longer casual. This was controlled. Respectful. Real. Bruce nodded once. That nod carried confidence built on understanding of timing, anatomy, distance, breath. Most fighters trained to hit harder. Bruce trained to hit smarter. The room held its breath. No one spoke. No one moved. Because every man there sensed it. They were about to witness something rare. Not a fight. Not a domination. A demonstration of mastery. And in just moments, Chuck Norris would discover that power alone, no matter how great, wasn't enough when facing someone who understood the human body better than anyone else in that room. What happened next would humble a champion. And rewrite how martial artists thought about combat forever. Chuck stepped forward. There was no warning, no exaggerated wind-up. Just pure, trained instinct. Years of competition had wired his body to strike faster than thought itself. His fist launched toward Bruce Lee's chest, direct, powerful, perfectly timed. A punch like that had ended fights. But this time, it never landed. In the same instant Chuck committed to the strike, Bruce moved, not backward, not away, but inside the attack. It was so fast that several men in the room blinked and missed it entirely. One moment Bruce was standing still. The next, he was no longer where Chuck expected him to be. Bruce's movement was minimal. Efficient. Almost invisible. His hand flicked forward, once, twice, 3 times, light, precise taps that didn't look like strikes at all. At the exact same moment, Bruce released a short, explosive breath from deep within his core. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't loud. It was controlled. No big hit. No dramatic impact. No flashy technique. Just precision. Chuck froze. Not by choice. His eyes widened as confusion replaced confidence. His body tried to continue forward, but something inside him refused to cooperate. His chest tightened as if an invisible hand had wrapped around his lungs. He inhaled. Nothing. His brain sent the signal again. Still nothing. Air wouldn't come in. The room didn't react right away because no one understood what they were seeing. Chuck Norris wasn't struck. He wasn't knocked down. He wasn't bleeding. Yet his body was shutting down. Chuck stumbled back a step, then another. His hand rose instinctively to his chest. His mouth opened again, desperate for oxygen, but his lungs stayed locked. Panic crept into his eyes. Not fear of pain. Fear of not breathing. The silence in the room became unbearable. Someone whispered, "What did he do?" Another murmured, "Did he even touch him?" Bruce stood inches away, perfectly still. Calm. Focused. Watching. Chuck dropped to one knee. His face tightened as every muscle in his chest screamed for air. His training told him to stay calm, but his body wasn't listening. Seconds stretched longer than they should have. 3 seconds. 5 seconds. Each one felt endless. Bruce finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Don't fight it," he said. "Relax." Chuck tried. But relaxing when your lungs refuse to work is not easy. His hands trembled. His breath came in shallow, useless attempts. Sweat formed instantly on his forehead, not from exertion, but from pure shock. The men watching had never seen anything like this. They were trained fighters. They understood pain. They understood knockouts. But this was something else entirely. Bruce had targeted control, not damage. Pressure points aligned with nerve clusters. A disruption of rhythm. A momentary override of the body's natural breathing response. It wasn't mystical. It wasn't magic. It was knowledge. Bruce finally stepped forward and placed 2 fingers lightly against Chuck's back. Another controlled breath, slow this time. Almost immediately, Chuck's chest released. Air rushed back into his lungs. He gasped sharply, coughing as oxygen flooded in like water breaking through a dam. His shoulders rose and fell violently as he struggled to regain control. Bruce stepped back. The lesson was complete. Chuck remained on one knee, breathing hard, staring at the floor. When he finally looked up, his eyes weren't angry. They were changed. "That wasn't strength," Chuck said quietly. "That was understanding." Bruce nodded once. In that room, something shifted forever. Everyone present realized they hadn't just witnessed a technique. They had witnessed the moment when power met mastery. And mastery won without leaving a mark. Chuck staggered back, one hand clutching his chest as if trying to pull air into his lungs by force. He wasn't hurt. There was no sharp pain. No broken rib. No blow that explained what was happening. Yet his lungs refused to work. His body reacted before his mind could catch up. His shoulders rose instinctively, chest expanding as he tried to inhale, but nothing filled it. The air around him might as well have been gone. 3 seconds passed. The room stayed frozen. 5 seconds. Someone took a half step forward, then stopped, unsure whether this was still part of the demonstration or something far more serious. 10 seconds. That's when panic set in. Not the kind that comes from losing a fight, but the deep, primal panic that hits when the body realizes survival is slipping out of reach. Chuck's eyes darted around the room, searching for answers that weren't there. His jaw clenched as his body demanded oxygen and got nothing in return. This was Chuck Norris. A man trained to stay calm under pressure. A man who had fought through pain, exhaustion, and defeat. But this was different. You can push through pain. You can fight through fatigue. You cannot fight when your body forgets how to breathe. His hand tightened against his chest, fingers digging into muscle as if that alone could restart his lungs. Sweat formed along his temples, rolling down his face in thin lines. His breathing came in short, useless attempts, his chest moving, but the air refusing to follow. Bruce Lee stood completely still. No rush. No concern on his face. Just calm. He watched Chuck closely, not with pride, not with dominance, but with control. Like a teacher watching a student reach the edge of understanding. Then Bruce spoke. His voice was low, steady, almost gentle. "Relax," he said. "Fight it, and it lasts longer." The words felt impossible to obey. How do you relax when your lungs won't obey you? Chuck tried to force himself to calm down. He loosened his shoulders, slowed his thoughts, let go of the instinct to struggle. Every second felt like an eternity. The room was dead silent. No one dared speak. No one dared move. Every man there understood the danger now. This wasn't a knockout. This wasn't a trick. This was control over the body itself. Some of the fighters exchanged uneasy glances. Others stared at Bruce with a new kind of respect, bordering on fear. Not because he had hurt Chuck, but because he hadn't needed to. Bruce had done the unthinkable. He had neutralized one of the strongest fighters in the room without violence. Without force. Without leaving a bruise. Chuck dropped fully to his knees now, his body surrendering to gravity as his strength drained away. His hands pressed into the floor, knuckles white, as he fought the urge to panic completely. Bruce took a step forward, but slowly, deliberately. Every movement was controlled, as if reminding everyone that nothing here was accidental. He placed 2 fingers lightly against a point near Chuck's shoulder blade, another against the base of his neck. Then he exhaled, long and measured. Almost immediately, Chuck's chest shuddered. Air rushed back into his lungs in a sharp gasp. He coughed, pulling in breath after breath, his body desperate to make up for what it had lost. His shoulders heaved as oxygen flooded his system. The crisis was over. But the shock remained. Chuck stayed where he was, breathing heavily, sweat dripping onto the floor. When he finally looked up at Bruce, there was no anger in his eyes. Only awe. Only realization. The room remained silent, not out of fear, but respect. Everyone there understood now. They hadn't just seen a demonstration of speed. They had witnessed mastery. A reminder that true power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need force. It simply controls the moment, and leaves everyone else struggling to catch their breath. Bruce lightly tapped Chuck's back. It wasn't forceful. It wasn't dramatic. Just a small, precise movement, almost gentle. And in that instant, everything changed. Air rushed back into Chuck Norris's lungs like a door being thrown open after being locked from the inside. He gasped sharply, coughing as his body fought to pull in breath after breath. His chest rose and fell violently, his hands bracing against the floor as he struggled to regain control. He fell fully to one knee, head lowered, breathing hard. Not from exhaustion. Not from pain. From disbelief. The room exhaled with him. Men who hadn't realized they were holding their breath finally released it. A few took instinctive steps back, as if needing distance from what they had just witnessed. Others stood frozen, eyes locked on Bruce Lee, seeing him not as a fighter, but as something far more dangerous. Chuck stayed where he was, kneeling, sweat dripping from his face onto the floor. When he finally lifted his head, his expression had changed completely. The confidence was still there, but it had been reshaped. Humbled. That wasn't strength, Chuck said quietly, his voice still catching between breaths. That was something else. Bruce nodded. No smile. No pride. Just acknowledgement. Speed, Bruce said calmly. Timing. Understanding the human body. Each word landed heavier than a punch. Bruce explained without lecturing. He spoke as if stating simple facts. The human body, he said, runs on rhythm, breath, balance, nerve response. Disrupt those at the right moment, and strength becomes irrelevant. You hit harder, Bruce continued, when you understand less. The room stayed silent. No one argued. Chuck slowly pushed himself to his feet. He rolled his shoulders, testing his breathing, making sure it was fully back. His lungs worked normally now, but his mind was racing. He had been faster than most men. Stronger than nearly all of them. And none of that had mattered. Chuck stepped forward and extended his hand, not as a challenge, but as respect. Bruce took it briefly, firmly, then released. That handshake marked something unspoken. From that day on, Chuck Norris never looked at martial arts the same way again. He trained differently. He listened more. He asked questions. And he never mocked Bruce Lee again. Before we move on, pause here. Backhand index pointing down comment, respect, if you believe skill will always beat raw strength. Thumbs up like this video if this moment surprised you. Bell subscribe if you want more real stories from martial arts legends. Because moments like this don't happen often. This wasn't about winning. This wasn't about dominance. It was about realization. The realization that real mastery isn't loud. It doesn't seek attention. And it doesn't need to hurt to prove its point. Bruce Lee had demonstrated something rare, control without cruelty, power without aggression, knowledge applied with restraint. Chuck Norris walked into that room as a champion. He walked out with something far more valuable, perspective. And everyone who witnessed it knew they had just seen something that would be talked about in whispers for decades, not because it was violent, but because it revealed a truth most fighters take a lifetime to learn. Years later, when interviews replaced sparring mats and memories softened with time, Chuck Norris would speak about that moment with a tone very different from the one people expected. Not boastful. Not defensive. Humbled. He admitted openly that what happened that day stayed with him longer than any victory or championship belt ever had. It changed the way I trained, Chuck said. It changed the way I thought. Before that encounter, Chuck's world had been built on discipline, power, and repetition. Hit harder. Move faster. Push through resistance. It was the mindset of a champion, and it had taken him far. But Bruce Lee showed him something deeper. After that day, Chuck trained differently. Smarter. He stopped chasing brute force and started chasing efficiency. He studied angles, distance, timing. He paid attention to breath, not just his opponent's, but his own. He learned that speed wasn't about moving fast all the time, but about moving at the right moment. Faster. Not in muscle, but in reaction. He refined his awareness. He learned to read intention before movement. To feel tension before a strike was thrown. Deeper. Chuck began studying anatomy, nerve pathways, balance points. He explored the philosophy behind technique, the why instead of just the how. He realized that real combat wasn't about overpowering someone, but about understanding them. Bruce Lee hadn't just interrupted his breathing. He had interrupted his ego. That was the real lesson. Bruce didn't embarrass him. Didn't chase applause. Didn't tell anyone to remember the moment. He simply demonstrated truth, and walked away. No trophies were won that day. No belts were awarded. No judges raised a hand. No crowd cheered. Yet a legend was confirmed. Not because Bruce Lee defeated Chuck Norris, but because he didn't need to. That encounter rippled outward. Fighters who heard the story stopped dismissing Bruce as just fast. Teachers began re-evaluating rigid styles. Younger martial artists realized that knowledge could outweigh strength. Chuck Norris went on to become a legend in his own right. Championships, films, fame, influence. But behind all of that success was a quiet respect he always carried for Bruce Lee. Whenever Bruce's name came up, Chuck never joked. Never dismissed. Never downplayed. Because he knew. He had felt it. He had experienced what it meant to face someone who understood the human body and the human ego better than anyone else in the room. Bruce Lee didn't leave scars. He left perspective. And that perspective followed Chuck for the rest of his career. In the end, the most powerful strikes aren't the ones that knock you down. They're the ones that make you rethink everything you thought you knew. That day, in a quiet room with no cameras and no audience, two legends crossed paths. One learned. One taught. And the world of martial arts was never quite the same again. Bruce Lee proved something timeless that day. Something far bigger than a technique, a demonstration, or a moment of shock. True power doesn't need to show off. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't seek validation. And true mastery ends fights before they even begin. Bruce didn't raise his voice. He didn't flex his muscles. He didn't humiliate anyone. He simply showed what happens when knowledge meets discipline. Most people believe winning means hitting harder, throwing faster punches, overwhelming an opponent with force. That belief exists not just in martial arts, but in life. People push harder, speak louder, dominate conversations, overpower situations. But Bruce Lee showed the opposite. You don't win by hitting harder. You win by understanding better. Understanding timing. Understanding distance. Understanding balance, breath, and intention. And most importantly, understanding yourself. Chuck Norris didn't lose that day. He learned. And that lesson carried more weight than any trophy ever could. Because strength fades. Speed slows. Muscles weaken. But understanding, that lasts. Bruce Lee's philosophy wasn't about fighting more, it was about fighting less. Ending conflict with awareness. Using intelligence instead of ego. Control instead of chaos. That's why his legacy still stands decades later. Not because of how many fights he won, but because of how deeply he changed the way people think. Before we end this story, take a moment. Speech balloon comment your favorite martial artist below. Let's honor the legends who shaped discipline, respect, and self-control. Thumbs up like this video if Bruce Lee still inspires you today. Bell subscribe for more untold moments from combat legends. Because these stories aren't just about fighting. They're about humility, growth, and the courage to learn, even when you're already strong. Some battles are loud. Some victories are obvious. But the greatest ones, they happen quietly. In the mind. In the breath. In the moment you realize there's more to learn. And that's why some fights aren't won with fists. They're won with knowledge. Martial arts uniform fire.